pretty exciting turnout. Anyways, welcome everybody. Thanks for attending our Traffic Link user training. We're actually up to our third session, especially around detection and counts. So we're starting the next grouping here. So pretty exciting. These training sessions have been going on for, I think this is our 7th or 8th month of them, and they've been very successful. Lots of great turnout, lots of good questions, lots of good follow-up. So I've been really excited to keep these going. And the more we get into it, I'm hoping the more knowledge transfer you can absorb throughout it. So for those that don't know me, my name is Brent Rogerson. I'm a sales engineer here at MyaVision. I have a slightly distorted picture there, but I tend to not put myself up on camera in these sessions because I think it's more about the content. But if we ever do a one-on-one session together, I guess you'll see me live in video. But I've spent a lot of time helping develop and use and train our products over the years here at MyaVision, and my main role to help our customers is to really make sure you're getting the most out of the product. So I really like these sessions because I get to just distill all the knowledge that I have off to our user base and create an ongoing medium of communication, especially while we're trying to do some ongoing learning. I know not everybody has an unlimited amount of time, so if these sessions are still helpful, please continue to provide the good feedback. If you want access to the videos following these sessions, please let me know as well. We can make sure that it happens. So I'm excited to take you through another session today. So just a slight recap. So far, like I mentioned, we're on our third session here now, where we've covered quite a bit already. So I know if you're jumping in here at the third session, just kind of be aware of the other two that we've already covered, and there are videos for them as well. But I would be happy to set up an initial training with anybody as well. So if you wanted to go back through session 1 or 2 one-on-one, that's fine as well. I'm going to cover some of the best practices later on in today's session. So we've covered a lot of in the first session, we covered phase and channel design, cabinet integration, more of the physical setup of detection. Then in session number 2, we got into the configuration of all of that. How do you get into some of the best practices of zone design and so on. And so we're going to cover a little bit more of that today in session 3, but I did want to highlight a new feature we recently released that allows us to configure in 2 different ways between the cloud and locally on the device. So we're going to cover that a bunch today, and some of the configuration best practices as well. I did want to get into in session 4. I know originally I was thinking that this would be the session today, but I think with the new feature launch, it's a little bit more relevant to talk about the local configuration tool. But in any case, next session, I'll still plan to do the in-depth, how does detection work, like behind the scenes, how does it work on the device, and why do these best practices become best practices? A lot of the reasons why we configure the way we do is somewhat of the foundational components of how our detection works. And so I think now that we've talked quite a bit about configuration between last session and this one, I do want to break down some of the why behind that a little bit more and get into that detail a little bit more. But in any case, we'll get into the local configuration and some of the zone best practices as well. So today, I'm going to kind of do this like a user manual style walkthrough, kind of a step-by-step. How do you set it up? How do you use it? Who's it intended for? And we're going to go into the in-app demo, which will make it a little bit easier to talk about the zone configuration at the same time, because we'll be able to transition to how to doing a local configuration all the way into just doing a configuration. If at the end of the session, I'm hoping that we might get a chance, or one of our product managers might join us at the end here. If not, we have a nice little Q&A at the end, where what we're really looking for is some product feedback. We want to get your voice on the user workflows and participate in some of the upcoming designs. So if you can stick it out to the end, we'd be very interested in kind of setting you up for how to provide that feedback. If we can set up some sessions, and if Moen joins us near the end here, he may be able to kind of preface that a little bit more. So we'll work through this today, and then we'll keep going through these sessions. I will try to keep this one. This one will maybe be a relatively short. I do want to try and keep it to the specific topic, but we'll see where we end up. All right, so let's get into it. So as many of you may have heard in many of our marketing messages or some of our release messaging that we've done over the last few months, we did release a roadside configuration tool. I'm somewhat using local configuration and roadside configuration somewhat interchangeably, but the concept here is that traditionally Miovision has had a cloud only configuration, which means you have to have a connection. You have to be in TrafficLink on the platform to configure it, which is not true anymore. We've released a roadside configuration, which means you can configure it in the cloud still, but you can also configure it by simply plugging into the device locally and configuring it on the system locally. This becomes really handy for construction or contractors or even technicians that are out in the field late at night or throughout the day just trying to make quick adjustments. This tool is really built for the power user at the roadside without having to worry about a cloud and network connection at any given time. Like when I worked for a city and when we went out to the field, I only had my personal phone on me, my personal cell connection. And I know for the most part, the cell connections are pretty robust these days, and we don't use a whole lot of data on our system, but it's a little bit tricky when you're asking your contractors to use their personal cell connections to configure a cloud device, especially when they're standing right next to it. So we did a bunch of work. We spent a bunch of time building this roadside configuration to give you both options. You can now configure it and manage it in the cloud, as well as managing it locally at the intersection. There is a full user manual of how to do this, and I would encourage you to share that with your contractors, or let me know if I can share that in any way that can help the full workflow. There's a very detailed video on how to do this as well. And so I'm going to go through some of those steps of what you should think about while you're working your way through this. I'm going to kind of go high level in the session, not necessarily too deep, but I think you'll get it as I go. But the main thing to think about in this overall feature set is you can now do both. You can configure in cloud and you configure roadside at the device without needing a cloud connection. This also means that if your device is on your managed network, so say you have fiber lines or you have fiber lines, radio networks, whatever it may be, you can configure over your own network directly to your device as well without having to go up into the cloud. So it gives you a version of our product that is completely off the network in a way that you can fully manage it while still being able to do all the cloud-based tools as well. So it gives you some options there. So I'm going to go through those steps. I'm going to cover it somewhat in the same format as the manual, like I said. The first one we'll talk about is the account admin settings, managing safety and security and everything on the account management side. And then we'll go through some of the major steps, the 6 steps of setting this up. Then we'll jump over into the platform and just kind of go around there as well. So let's get into it. So the first step to think about when you're trying to utilize a roadside configuration is to get comfortable with the admin tool. So if you're an administrator of your account and you're an administrator on this call, this is directed at you. If not, make sure your administrators of the account do get this set up. User permissions are a very important part of managing security. Between your personal passwords and the permission levels that those passwords give are an important thing to keep track of, and the administrators should be watching those pretty closely. But when it comes to all the devices physically in the field, our first line of defense of security at a device level is the port itself or the access to the device locally. So if someone were to open up the traffic cabinet, they shouldn't be able to just plug into a device and have access to everything. It needs to be password protected. So the password is actually managed on the cloud side in TrafficLink and by an administrator. The cloud needs to set a password for every device in the network. And so there is one password that covers all of the devices. So you don't have to think about a password for every device you have. It's just one password that gives you access to every device. And then you can give that password to your contractors and you can give that access to very specific people that you are comfortable with giving that to. but it is a password that needs to be managed and set up before any device would be eligible to have a roadside configuration tool. And I don't want to gloss over this because security is #1 in our development priorities. Everything needs to be security always has to be considered. So set a password that has pretty strict requirements. Don't use something like admin because people will guess that. Try to actually make this a hard password. That's why we put some requirements in here of length, the type of characters, and so on. I know that may make it hard to keep track of, but security is important. So write it down on your, or put it somewhere where you'll find safe, and make sure you're aware of what the password is. It can always be changed. So if you forget it, you can always go back and change it, and then it will resync out to all of the devices. So don't worry too much about it if you do forget it. Just make sure that it is set and managed. So something to keep on the top of your mind. As you're handing it out to contractors, this will become very easy for them to just remember one password, and they can just keep adding it to as they go for every device that they install and so on. So let's go through some basic steps of how to do this if you're at the roadside. Obviously, I'm working in a home office, so somewhat of doing this at a cabinet is maybe going to be hard to articulate in a virtual session. So I'll do my best through some of these pictures. But it is pretty basic. It should be as simple as it sounds. But I'll take you through the 6 major steps to really get into it. So step 1, probably the simplest one, got to plug in the laptop to the SmartSense, connect the Ethernet port on the laptop to any open Ethernet port on the SmartSense. So you can simply just plug it into, if it's port 4 or port 3. Often our cameras are in port 1 and 2 because those are the PoE ports. So your PoE 1 and PoE 2 are often occupied by the cameras. But then you have PoE 3 or 4, depending on where you plugged in the SmartLink. So you can easily connect into the device with your laptop, and then away you go. But step 2, you do have to set up your laptop a little bit to interact with the local network of the cabinet and the local network of the SmartSense. So there's a quick step to configure your laptop in a way that it has a static IP address. This is a pretty common practice for any device in IP management. You do need to just set your laptop to the right range. And so all of our devices in the cabinet, all the MyoVision devices anyway, they have an IP address of the 192.168.0.xx. So all of them are in that range. Our SmartLink and SmartSense and SmartViews, they're always under 50. So we somewhat arbitrarily chose .111 for our device. You can literally choose anything above 50 and it'll probably be fine. But if you do have other devices in the cabinet, you will have to be mindful of what IP addresses are available. So we often reserve the same one every time just for ourselves, just to keep it straight. But you can go into your network connections on your laptop, your Ethernet network cable properties, the IPv4 properties, and then just set an IP address like you see in the image here. It should be a minute exercise, should be pretty simple. In the future, we're going to be thinking about a local client version of this, where you can actually put an app on your computer and actually manage it that way, so you don't have to really think about the network settings in the same way. However, even in that tool that we come up with, we'll still have a network component of it to make sure the devices can interact as expected. So once you're on the same IP address and your laptop is set to use a static IP address, then you're just on the same network as the SmartSense. So now that you're plugged in and you're on the same network, you can simply actually just go to your browser and type in the IP address of the SmartSense. And so the SmartSenses are all the exact same IP address, and they'll all have the same passwords as well. So you can go to the same 192.168.0.20 in your browser, and it will open up the roadside configuration tool immediately. So step 1, plug in your laptop. Step 2, configure the network. Step 3, just go to the browser and put in the IP address. And then step 4 is you're in it. You're here to log in now. And so our username and password comes up first. You type in admin. It's always admin for the username. You type in admin, and then the password that you set at the very first stage of the conversation. make sure it's a strong password. Don't use admin. You won't let you. It'll make you actually select something a little bit more rigid than that. But in any case, you put in your username and password, and then you sign in and you get right into the configuration. Now, if you've configured an intersection before, the first thing you're probably looking at here is, wow, it looks the same as what I'm used to. And that's 100% right. It is identical. It is the exact same user interface, both locally and in the cloud. We didn't want to have two different configuration methods. We just want you to have to learn one thing and be familiar with it on either locally on the device or up in the cloud. So as soon as you get into the device and you log in, it will feel very much like you're in TrafficLink, the same type of user interface, the same type of views, and even viewing things like the 360 video and stuff will all feel very, very much the same. And so I'll kind of break that down a little bit more once we get over to the in-app, but it is important to know that it will feel the same, and it's not actually the same spot, but it's supposed to feel the same. One more consideration before we jump over to that. You're maybe thinking about this already, but there is a concept of there is a configuration that someone did locally on the device, and then there's configuration that people can do up in the cloud. And if someone were to set up a configuration locally on the device, you first arrive when you come into the cloud, you'll see this banner that says locally deployed configuration. What this means is that it means that someone has deployed something locally at the cabinet, and it's not necessarily syncing back. And so there's a little bit of a catch here, where one feature that we need to still work on is actually syncing back the local configurations in a way you can kind of send them in two different directions. But that doesn't mean you can't call up the configuration and actually finish it and fix it from the cloud side. So you just have to configure the SmartSense and redeploy it from the cloud perspective. So essentially one side always rules. And so if you do it from the local side, then it'll always take precedent. And then if you do it from the cloud, it will take precedent. And so you can kind of go both ways in that statement. Just one will show either way, depending on which direction you came from. So both works. You just have to be cautious of this step, I guess, in the sense of if you run into this, that doesn't mean anything's wrong. It just means that somebody has deployed something locally that you can then go to configure the SmartSense and override it or change it. And so if you run into this, don't worry. It's just that's why it's a gray box, not a red box. It's just telling you that someone has changed something locally. So before we get into that, let me jump over to TrafficLink and we'll go through an intersection. Because this is connecting to a real device and we're talking about, hopefully my screen is still sharing. Because we're talking to a real device and we're going to configure something as if we're plugged into it directly. I'm doing this on a demo device. So this device is actually in my lab here. The connection is not roadside, so there may be some things along the way that we just have to wait to load here, but I'm doing this on a safe device to kind of show, but I do recognize that doing this virtually has some of its limitations, and you'll have to trust me a little bit in the process here of getting to the roadside configuration tool. So let me just take you through what I mean, and then as I go, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or just hold them to the end, and we'll have a Q&A section in about 15-20 minutes here. So I go to my single device here in my lab. I can click on the device. It loads up just like all the things that you're likely used to. I can see my intersection in the same way. This one's actually already configured and underway. Right before we get to configuration, up in the top right is where you can find those admin settings. So I'm an administrator of this account. If you go up to the top right of the account, the admin settings, you can see the roadside configuration password here. And so this is showing me the, oops, there we go. This is showing the password that is currently set. It's hidden, so I can't actually see it, so I have to remember what it is. And so if you need to change it, you can simply change it as an administrator, or you can disable the roadside configuration altogether. So say you don't want anybody to be able to touch your device locally, you certainly can decide that and make it so that no one can touch it. Or you can just change the password and make it so that if you give out the password to a contractor, but then maybe change contractors, you can then change your password so that it's not a perpetual password. But that's just things you have to think about. So in any case, I'll go back to the intersection. And so when we're on our intersection, like I said, it's set up somewhat already. So we'll kind of back our way through this. There's two spots to configure, like I said. So we're going to go first to the normal configuration. So if I click on the configuration in the top right here, so this is all of our intersection details where we determine the map layouts for channel design and detector, so signal phase design and detector channel design. And this is how we put it on the map and aggregate data together. So all of these different channels are set up here so that you can configure them, label them, and associate them with different approaches and movements. Covered a lot of this, I think, in the first session. If not, can always do another one where we break this part out a little bit more. But really, it comes down to when you're configuring detection for input to a controller, understanding the phase and the channel design is pretty important to that, especially when we're doing data aggregation. But in any case, so up here in the top right, you have the option to configure the intersection details or configure your SmartSense. So when I click on the SmartSense, I'm actually currently using a cloud-based configuration that was pushed to this device. So I have no banner saying local device. I have nothing warning me that something else has been changed locally. So right now I've come from the perspective of the cloud. I have a simple configuration of 2 channels here and a turning movement count set up. If I wanted to just simply edit this, so if I'm in the cloud and I want to edit the cloud side, I can go over here to the top right, select edit, and it takes me into the full cloud-based configuration. So our normal camera configuration, detector configuration, and turning movement. I can save the draft in the cloud, or I can deploy any changes that I make. So this is what many of us are used to. This is the cloud-based approach. And so if I go back to the configuration page, I'm going to show you a little trick here on how to get to the local tool. And I promise you this isn't gimmicky, but I'm going to explain it anyway. The SmartLink actually has a what we call a remote access client. It allows us to connect local devices to the network in a way that we can access those devices as if we're standing in front of them. That's the purpose of that remote access client. It creates a secure connection to a controller, to a conflict monitor, to any peripheral device that you have in the cabinet, and it will appear as if your laptop is on that same network. And so I have done that here for the purposes of the virtual demo. I set up the roadside configuration tool as a third-party device that I'm going to access over the network. So I'm remotely viewing the local tool, which sounds a little gimmicky, but really what it's supposed to show you here is what the tool looks like. And if I were to access it locally on the device, how does it actually look? So I set it up here. It is separate. So the SmartSense is up here, the T number. If I go here, I can connect and configure it, just the same thing I just showed you. Or I can connect to the roadside configuration tool that I set up here to remotely access the local tool again. I'll hit connect on it. What this actually opens up is our remote access client. So this is creating that secure connection as if I was plugged into it locally at the cabinet. So I'll just let this connect. Maybe I clicked too many times now. Oops. Connecting to my SmartLink. Just disconnect that and start it over. There we go. So it immediately actually pulled it up for me, which is kind of handy. So what I did there was I set up that remote connection. It went green on me, so I'm connected to the roadside configuration tool now over a very specific port. So right now I've just created the network connection that I can use to access the roadside configuration tool. When it opens up, like I said before, Now it's slightly different. I'm in a different window. I'm on a different page in the browser. I can see the IP address that has been set up here. I have somewhat more limited functionality now. I can stream the video camera, or I can simply configure it. So if I go over to the video streaming on the local tool, it'll pull up my video stream. The purpose of this is so you can do kind of two things on the local tool. You can plug in your laptop, you can configure it, you can make adjustments, but you can also stream the video locally on the device, and that allows you to, maybe if you're roadside, you just want to see what the video looks like and you don't want to go over the connection, you can simply do that. You can view the detection overlay, so this is what's live at it, and you can see it kind of play locally. You can troubleshoot that way. You can essentially see the same video you would in the cloud. And now you may be thinking, if I'm over a fiber network, do I get access to this as well? 100%. So this allows you to, on your local network, also use the same video streaming off the cloud base, not using the cloud-based version. You're actually streaming directly from the device. And that lets you kind of disconnect a little bit from the cloud if you ever need to. So I'll go back to the configuration page. For some reason, my internet's decided to go slow on me, of course. In the, like I said before, the configuration tool is actually, the UI feels very similar here. And the UI is, it's supposed to feel similar. There we go. I don't know why that took a few seconds. So we do see just the two tabs, not all the tabs on the left. We can configure the camera, we can configure our detection zones and the turning movement counts, the same steps that we get in the cloud-based version. So if you're configuring the camera, and I'll quickly just go through these steps and then we'll get more to the detection zones, and we'll pivot a little bit more to some of the zone configuration while we're here. So we first set the camera point below the camera like we normally do. We still draw or determine the height of the camera. The directionality of it is slightly different in the workflow compared to our existing configuration where we're using Google Maps. The assumption here is that the device isn't connected, so we don't have access to Google Maps. So you basically just have to determine a direction that the camera is facing. This allows us to label things automatically. So you hear on the right, they'll take you through all the steps here on the right, but essentially you can assign a direction and just determine which way you want it to go. And so generally we're facing south here. I'll hit done. That sets up my camera. So again, the camera has identified that point below the camera to give it a sense of curvature, identify the height. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you are, the better the system gets as a starting point. When we think about our detection system coming out of a box and just operating out of the box, I know we talk a lot about machine learning and the time to learn different environments, which all happens. But out of the box, it's supposed to also work, and it's supposed to be as accurate as everything that we have deployed coming right out of the box. And the thing that we do to calibrate it or give it its starting point is this camera configuration that I'm showing. We give it a sense of the curvature, we give it a sense of the height, and then we give it a sense of the direction it's looking. And that gives it a calibration of the environment that it's in, so that as soon as you configure it, it's up and running. So that's step one, camera one, our camera configuration. Step two is our detector configuration. So very similar to what you may have experienced if you've configured our system before in the cloud, it feels exactly the same here, but the same kind of idea. So I already configured one zone here, and I did a left turn and a combined through right movement here on this approach. But let me go configure another one. Let me click over here. And this may cover a couple things now that we're into the configuration of zones. So I'm going to kind of cover both sides a little bit of the local tool as well as configuring zones along the same way here. So first step is, again, following the directions along the right, name your approach and assign a direction. So here is our eastbound movement. Because we set that first stage of directionality, it's already labeling our movements for us, which is handy. yes, say eastbound. We can change the label if we want to. We can choose a different approach if it's wrong for whatever reason. And so I hit continue. And then the next step is we can start getting right into the configuration. So at the bottom left, we see the crosswalk configuration or a detector. So let's start with a detector. So while I'm going here, I'll kind of give some tips on how to draw a zone. So the most logical statement I can make is just follow the lane markings. And so it's a combination of, I guess, of the lane markings and general user behavior in the sense of, cars stop maybe a little bit too forward into the zone. So you may want to draw it a little bit outwards like that. Overlapping a vehicle zone with a crosswalk, it is 100% okay. These are classifier specific zones. So this particular blue zone right here is looking for everything but pedestrians. And then a crosswalk zone is looking for everything that is a pedestrian. So one is a pedestrian and one is not. And so we have a blue zone and a green zone that you'll see here in a second, but we'll draw the zones to the lane markings for the most part. I kind of tend to go on the inside of the lane markings just so that we avoid any overlaps on the zones themselves. The reason why we don't necessarily want to do overlapping of zones, and by overlapping I mean something like that. If you were to put a zone kind of over top of each other like that, try to avoid that. And the reason for it is in our algorithm, the way we determine lane assignment is actually center line of vehicle to center line of zone. And if you can think about, there's a center line kind of going through this left turn zone, and then there's a center line going through the through zone. If you overlap them on top of each other, the center lines are actually very close, which means the center line of the vehicle starts to flicker a little bit. It doesn't actually know what lane it's in anymore because technically it's in both, but not at the same time. So there's no precedent of zone layering either. So we tend to just avoid overlapping. It's either in a lane or it's not. Obviously, there's maybe use cases that could suggest that an overlap could help in certain scenarios, maybe classification-based scenarios, where you want one zone to trigger if it's a certain class or another class, like a bus classification trigger zone versus a car triggers it. You could certainly think about those types of things, but generally try to avoid overlapping, put the zones in logical spots of where the cars are supposed to be. You don't have to worry about perception. And what I mean by perception is we're looking at a 2D image of a 3D environment. And we have to, on our end, in our algorithms, account for the perceived view of the object. And by that, I mean, so like if you look at these cars up here in the top of the view, when you look at a car, the wheelbase is clearly in, maybe here's another example here. The wheelbase of this car here is in the through lane. It's obvious that it's in the through lane. However, because it's a 2D image, you can see that the top car part of the car is over top of the next lane over top of it. So when we do lane-based assignments and when we do our understanding of an object and we draw those blue boxes around the cars, we're also calculating what is the center line of the wheelbase of that car, which is a visual projection of the object in a 2D frame in a way that we can say it is in this lane and not that lane, despite the overlap into the other zone. And so because we're looking constantly for those center lines of each car, that helps us really filter out false positives on which lane is the car in. It makes it so that we don't have shadows of cars or objects moving in the wrong direction. All of those things are filtered out very easily by calculating the wheelbase really accurately. And so that's what we use to determine lane-based assignments of movements, is really understanding the wheelbases of the car despite the projection into the 2D image. So with that said, going back to the zones, try not to overlap the zones. Sometimes you have to kind of get them really close, and it's okay to butt them right up against each other, but I kind of put them really close, go follow the lanes just on the inside of the lane markings, and the closer you get to that, the better. There are use cases where we may kind of go off script a little bit, where maybe there's a particular angle or a particular distance that we're seeing that is slightly different than what I'm describing here. But those are one-off cases that we can help you through if it comes up as an issue. but for the most part, use this as a standard design. In terms of the length of the zone, this somewhat is determined on your preference and policies of the amount of headway or gap out times that you're looking at your intersection operation. So when it comes to drawing the length of the zone, I typically just default to 2 car lengths back, but you arguably could do 3. The way our distance calculation works for distance from the view of the camera is we want to be within 150 feet of the stop bar, allowing for 40 feet back from the stop bar. So that means you have about a 40-foot long zone that you can use if the front of the stop bar is at 150 feet. So what that lets you do is allows you to configure it in any way you want. Obviously, if you go back really far, you won't really gain too much because once it becomes in view and it becomes an accurate hold of a call, it'll stay holding further into the zone. But you can certainly make it a standard to draw 2-3 car lengths back. To us, it doesn't matter if a car is in the zone, it's going to trigger the call. But if you have certain operations like gap out or headway times that really to change the cycle lengths or change the length of the phase, you certainly consider the length of your zone and how that could impact that operation. Myovision does participate in a lot of the configurations, and so if you need our help to configure them, certainly communicate what your desired zone drawing is. So the last point is obstructions on this approach anyway, and then I'll jump over to another approach for another point. But on this approach here, we can immediately see that there's an obstruction. That is okay. Minor obstructions are okay. We've done a lot of work both in the past and recently on minimizing and removing false positives caused by objects that are not vehicles. And we have a tool that removes them pretty consistently so that we don't have to do any things like blackout regions or object blackout drawings on the image in a way, say like ignore this object here, it's not a vehicle. Our system does all that automatically through an understanding of what its viewings between, like the background is a component of that, so what is not moving versus what is moving, and we filter out everything that's not moving in a way that we can accurately detect the vehicles themselves. So don't worry too much about minor obstructions. So like I would call this a minor obstruction here because you're talking about a minor couple feet in the view here. A major obstruction would be about 25% of the zone, I would say, or more completely covered. So like if you have a signal mast arm completely covering your approach, which we really don't have one here, but if you had a signal mast arm completely covering an approach, we obviously can't see through the object, and the less of the view that is obstructed, the better. So with a single point camera, you're always going to get minor things in the view, and that is okay. And so the vehicle is held behind the minor obstructions. We can see it. We can still identify it from the basic features of a vehicle. We can still classify and count it all appropriately. The things that you want to watch out for is major obstructions. So like outright vehicles are going behind it, and there's moments in time where you can't see anything in the zone, and the vehicles essentially go in behind an obstruction and they disappear for a moment and they come back. While we do hold it and we do have some predictive analytics to manage that, it's not 100%. So the larger the obstruction, the more chance there is that vehicle will be dropped. So keep that in mind when you're doing camera placements. Ask for our help for installation guidance on where the camera should go to make sure we're minimizing obstructions. Obviously, from a single point camera, there's always going to be a give and a take or a pro and a con to every corner, and we can manage them for the most part, especially if they're minor. If not, think about different camera placements that minimize those quite a bit. So this I would all consider as minor. Still draw the zone as if you would on any other approach or in any other movement lane to lane. It being a curbside lane, you can maybe go a little bit further if it's a right turn, or maybe you want to add a delay to this movement because it's a right turn only. Up to you to decide. So I'll just quickly configure this approach. This is our left turn. I'm just not going to label these anything. So we got a left, through, And you'll notice that on this configuration page, you can decide, is it a presence or a pulse zone? Is it virtual only? So like, don't tell my controller anything. Do I need a delay? Do I want an extend? You can basically control the zone in any way you want. That was done, and this will be our, is that actually a through? It's a right only. And so we'll say that's a right, channel 5, and we'll add a 5-second delay to this movement because it's a right turn, and I'll hit done. So that's that approach. The next approach that I want to talk about is more this head-on view. So it's come up a little bit in the last few months about head-on approaches and how to manage the configuration. And it should be as intuitive as it sounds, like just draw the zone appropriately into the lane. But again, because it's a projection of a 3D image, you have to think about the length of the box a little bit more than anything. Mainly because we can see the front of the vehicles, but if there's, say, like a bus, like you can see in this image, the bus is actually slightly, it could obstruct behind it. So we want a zone that somewhat covers the view that we're looking for. And so the system will obviously try to help a little bit, but we want to draw the zone, still making sure it's appropriately back towards the back of the intersection so that we're detecting the actual length of a vehicle, not just a single car. Someone, I don't know who that is. Anyways, I'll just wrap this last approach up, and then we'll finish up this topic. But yeah, so we want to draw this more directly to the lane itself and get it into a good spot. And then same thing. So it's the same concept, just in a different view. Go lane to lane as you would appropriately. Watch the video after you deploy the config to make sure they are back far enough. And it's pretty important that it is the correct length more than anything. Again, don't overlap the zones and just draw them appropriately. So just like that. So I'm just gonna add a quick channel to these, and then I'll deploy that, and I'll show you the last step. That is a right, not a left. I'm a little bit backwards. There we go. So we are through again, and we'll hit done. So once we get that all set up, you have all your detection zones. You can go back, then you can do the same thing for the turning movement count. So the UI is all the exact same as the cloud. You can configure your turning movement count. For each one of your turning movement counts, remember to draw the lanes, each lane for each movement. So on the last step here of configuring movements, you can see the heat map that pops up after it's been deployed for a little bit. This tells you exactly where the cars are moving, and then you can adjust your lanes to the turning movement count. So often I configure each one of these movements and get it all set up, and then I come back to it in a few hours or in 24 hours and adjust them based on the heat map that you see here, and you can go through and adjust each one to the actual movement of travel. This improves the accuracy of the turning movement count, so be sure to check that out. Make sure all of your movements are following your actual travel. You will have to wait a few minutes following the first deployment to get a set of data here, but definitely take advantage of this feature. Add a through lane for every movement that occurs. So here we have, and what I mean by that is we have a left, a through, and a right. However, there could be 2 through movements here. And so to add another through movement, we can simply add a movement here from the bottom. We'll say this is lane 2, and then we get a second lane directly on it. In our turning movement count data, we aggregate that information together, so you just get a total through movement. You don't have to do any post-processing work there, but having direct lane configurations is pretty important to accuracy. So work your way through that. Once you're comfortable with all the movements, you can go ahead and deploy. So now that we're back here, so I know we kind of jaunted a little bit over to the configuration best practices. We're still in a roadside configuration tool. So if up here you can check, you can see we're in the roadside configuration tool. We can now hit deploy. We can say, yes, we are deploying this to the intersection. I'll give that a second. New configuration is active, it says in the bottom left. Now, if I go back to traffic link, so if I was out in the field configuring that and everything works well, it gets deployed, you can view it all locally like we showed earlier. If I go back to traffic link now, and I go back to my same intersection, and remember we were looking at it from a cloud perspective before. If I now go to my configuration again and hit configure SmartSense, I now have that locally deployed configuration banner. So it's warning me that someone has deployed the configuration locally now on that roadside configuration tool, and it's been done. I can go back and configure it or deploy a new configuration if I want from the cloud and override the local one, but it's giving me that warning that someone has done something locally now. Awesome. All right, so that is the end of the local configuration tool and some of the best practices. We will certainly get into more of that in our next session as well. If you do want to do more configuration one-on-one, maybe we can talk through different scenarios of zones, please let me know. I'd be happy to work through a session of that and kind of offload my configuration knowledge that myself or even the TAM team has as well. And make sure that we get those that knowledge across. So we'll close that out. Go back to our session. So I want to give a moment. I'm not sure if actually Mohan was able to jump on. Shannon, are you on the call still?
I'm here.
Oh, Mohan. Okay,
Hello.
great. So Mohan, we have a nice group on the call right now, and I want to give you a few minutes if you have them, and I'm very excited that you're able to join us. And just for the group, I know Mohan is our product manager for detection and counts, and he spends a lot of time working and developing our overall product. And I wanted to give Mohan you a minute just to say hi, to offer your help and support, and maybe see how we can get this user group that has joined us on this call to provide you with more feedback. So I don't know if you want to take a few minutes and talk about that.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of you, I mean, I've spoken with many of you before. For a lot of you, maybe we probably haven't met, but I hope to change that soon. One of the things that we're really, really focused on this year, especially with our detection and counts products, is how well does our product fit into your workflows and your teams and how you do things. We don't want to, there's a lot of things we do want to revolutionize, but we have to fit into how your teams and organizations work. And so Brent is kind of showing, sort of showed the local configuration. That was sort of a direct response to some feedback we got. But I really want to stress we're not done. And I suspect we'll always be responsive, we'll always be curious. And we're entering a mode right now of really interviewing users and people who live and breathe this stuff every day to sort of give us the straight goods for how should a detection system be to configure? What should it feel like? Who are the people doing this? What context do they have? Or what sorts of things do you do when there's a complaint or something? What are your first workflows? What things keep you up at night around a detection system? All these sorts of questions we want to engage very directly. So I'll be reaching out to many of you. If you're interested, I'd love it if you could get in touch with us. I'm sort of maintaining a list of people who I can go to and ask questions to, get some feedback from when we have early designs, but also to really interview you, because this is how we shape our roadmap. It can't come from anyone else other than the people on this call, right? If I sort of imagine things and come up with ideas, that would be great for me, but not so great for you. So I can only be as good as the information coming in. And so this is sort of the first time you'll hear my voice, but probably not the last. I really would love it if all of you could think about just things that have been irritating you or ideas you might have for us. And if you have the time, please do reach out to us. And I guess I'll apologize in advance because I might reach out to you anyway. Yeah, but we're really kicking off this focus and for this year, so you'll hear a lot more from us on that front.
Awesome, thanks, Mohan. If we have a chat window open, right now. If you have any questions for Mohan or any questions in general about the session today, we'll take the next few minutes to certainly answer them. So use that chat box if I think that's the easiest way to do it. Let me
That
see.
sounds good. Brent, you'll have to read the chats to me, I'm afraid.
How do I see? Shannon, do you know if there's a way to see all the questions on here?
Sorry about that. I was just getting off of mute. I don't have any questions at the moment. I'm just going to check the chat as well. I don't see any questions in the chat either.
Oh.
I don't know if somebody wants to. Oh, I think I do see a hand being raised. Let me see if I can.
I didn't know where to see that.
No, there doesn't seem to be a hand being raised.
Okay.
I can unmute all. If you don't feel comfortable putting it in the chat, I can unmute all our lines at the moment, and you can ask a question that way. So I'll open up that for a moment.
Sounds good. And yeah, everyone can maybe marinate on this too. This isn't sort of your last opportunity to give us input. You can, I'll just say this aloud so you can email me, but my email address is mthomas, T-H-O-M-A-S, mthomas@myovision.com. Just reach out if there's anything that comes up or any thoughts you have. Really.
I do have one that came in, Mohan.
Oh, good.
And the question is, are you planning on adding pedestrian detection in the future, especially with COVID?
That's a really good question. We've had a bunch of people ask us about it. It's something that we've actually actively been testing and trying. It's also the kind of thing that we want to make sure we get right. We don't want to sort of put out a half attempt there. So much in early R&D is how I'd talk about it. It's very helpful for me though to hear like what specific use cases you have. I think it's probably to substitute a push button. That's why you're mentioning the COVID thing is my guess. We've also heard about people asking for extensions and that kind of thing. But yeah, I'd love to talk more about that actually.
Nice, yeah. We can maybe follow up on that question, Shannon, if you got the contact.
Yeah, that's really good actually. Yeah. I can't actually see who typed that, but yeah, if you could connect us.
I have a question. It's Bernard Tong here with the City of Coquitlam. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. Thanks for the presentation. It's very informative. I've asked this question to tech support numerous times, but I thought maybe I would air it out just to see if anybody else, if you have another response for it. We in Coquitlam have installed a number of systems with the main premise for data collection. I mean, certainly the detection is great, and we want to have both work well. But one of the things that's really become, you were asking about things that are starting to get a little annoying or, our workflow, is the fact that a TMC or a turning movement count box for large intersections where you have channelized rights, we're often not able to stretch the TMC box large enough to capture those right turns at all or accurately to our satisfaction. So we end up pulse zones. Understandably, that's a workaround, but the thing that's annoying right now is that anytime we want to distill the data at a glance, we have to kind of piece together our pulse counts with our TMC counts. Pulse counts come in 5-minute bins versus the 15-minute bins on the TMC side. And of course, I got a lot of layman users who just want to look at a graphic, and they see a graphic and often they'll see the 24-hour volumes and look at that as a trend, but not necessarily look to see that, oh, maybe one of the movements are missing. And the context of that is that it's actually 11 out of 12 movements or 8 out of 12 movements on that summary for the continuous termination count because the approach volumes are not included. I'm wondering if there's direction, how the direction is right now with MileVision to try to make that more usable. I mean, it's great that there is a response, but the response right now is really for the power user and those who know to look for the whole picture. A lot of my managers and stuff have voiced that, you know, we're paying for this. This should be something that we see in future development, and I've been promising it for about 12 months, and I keep telling them it's definitely in the works, but it's taking a little bit of time. Can I give them a little bit better answer than that?
Yeah, I agree. I agree that that's really no good, and it's very much a power user. Yeah, you probably didn't hear me, but I sighed when I heard you say that. You have to use the TMC and the pulse zone. It's a workaround, but not one that any of us are very proud of. So what we're doing right now, and probably in the next couple of weeks, you won't see a gigantic release. But the reason for that is we're refactoring. This is going to get a little jargon heavy, but we're refactoring some of the code that's supporting the configuration library, and the reason for it is exactly requests like this, like things that you can point to what you want to do on the screen, and for whatever reason, choices that we made in the past, it's not possible to just draw what you want. And so what this is going to look like is that big TMC box you see in the middle. You'll be able to sort of break it up and draw movements in different places. So that artificial constraint that we have now of, you know, draw a big square or a rectangle to cover everything in the intersection, it leaves a lot to be desired. And so what we're doing is sort of a fundamental rework of how we've thought about config. It will happen slowly at first, but you'll start to see a very increased velocity of features, and this one's on the list. We call it sort of slip lanes. That's the code name internally. But that's very, very much on the list. I appreciate you've probably heard that a few times, but it's what the team is actively working on right now. So I appreciate that question.
Thank you for that. I do have a follow-up question, and it is a different, again, with counts. We still have the banner of beta on bicycle counting, and of course, the alternate modes are of great interest to transportation professionals, and it's a trend that's not going to go away. We're only going to be more interested in accurate bike counting, not less. At this point, we're definitely noticing the bikes are being counted. There are definitely some drawbacks, and we're identifying what those are. But at what point will you think that the bike counting can have the moniker of beta removed from it?
That's also a very good question. So right now, the way I talk about bike counts is I would trust the data to tell me something statistically significant. By that I mean, if volumes that MileVision is reporting go up, it means something really did happen in real life. And what we've also found is most of the time, most sort of ordinary intersections, our bike counts actually, we probably should take away the beta tag. We're putting ourselves a little bit through the grinder on assessing some very, very complex core or downtown intersections, and we're maybe to our own detriment really sticklers for accuracy. And so really what the beta tag invites is let's make sure that whichever deployment we've got, is it solving your problem? And there's a real chance that it actually is, but we're doing just a little bit more say science in the background to prove to ourselves and to prepare some communication to make it clear to everyone else, here's where it works really, really well. This is where, you know, it might undercount, or here's what scenarios where it might not quite right, but the numbers are representative, and here's where we wouldn't trust it to work. And so it's really, we're building those exact parameters and figuring out the language around that. We've been able to be much more articulate for vehicles and pedestrians, but see a wide variety of different bike deployments, and so it's an abundance of caution is really where it's coming from. But we've had many customers just use the bike data, and it solving their problem. So my expectation is in the next couple of months we'll put out an announcement with some more details around that. But I wouldn't hesitate to see if we can use the bike data today. You know, like for you, for example, and see what problems it can solve today.
Yes, I do agree. I think the relative difference of what MileVision's outputs are for bicycle volumes are definitely telling, and I could rely on that. One of the things I've noticed is that, of course, bikes are kind of a hybrid between a vehicle and a pedestrian. So they tend to use the roadway. They can have dedicated laning. They can have shared laning, and of course, they can also use pedestrian facilities.
Exactly.
One of the things about the MileVision, it was quite by accident. I found this out yesterday, and one of the reasons why I wanted to hop on here is to share my my discovery is that it appears, of course, your pedestrian count zones right now do not count cyclists, at least not to my knowledge, and maybe I'll ask you to respond to that in a minute, whether they get counted as a bike, whether they get counted as a pedestrian or whether they just get excluded altogether if a bicyclist went through a crosswalk. But what we did notice quite by accident is that we had an intersection where we had quite a number of bicyclists or bikes discovered on a U-turn. We said, this is a really high U-turn. Why is a bike doing a U-turn on a hill? So we took a closer look at it. I reviewed tons of footage. And what we've discovered is when cyclists are traveling in a crosswalk that's adjacent to or touching the U-turn TMC line, it actually counts it as a U-turning bike in that crosswalk, which became very useful. Now all of a sudden we have cyclists counting in that crosswalk, at least in the one direction, because of course if cyclists were traveling in the opposite direction to that U-turn line, it didn't count it. So I guess what I'm trying to say by sharing that is that we are getting some indirect, by accident, fluky, additional value out of the TMC counting of cyclists counting. But I wonder if it might make it just simpler if we were to allow, or somehow on the back end, and to make this sound really easy, create a pedestrian zone and allow for it to count cyclists.
Oh my goodness, I hadn't heard of that before, but I just wrote it down. On a crosswalk triggering a U-turn. That's clever, but I'll admit I'm a little horrified by that. So I'd like to look into it. As far as counting bikes on a crosswalk goes, this goes back to the config refactor. It's one of the other things on our list. It's actually quite easy to do in as far as our back end goes. The front end doesn't easily support it, but it is something, if you're interested, that I think we can look at configuring for particular intersections. It's a little bit more of a back end configuration. I'm worried perhaps what I'm signing our technical account managers up for, but it's something we've done before in a few places where you can just say, this crosswalk also report bicycle volumes, and you'll get sort of a separate report for that. We've done that in several places. I'd much rather do that than have you start to try and use U-turn to count bicycles. I'd feel a lot better about us just doing it on the crosswalk. Yeah, and I'll say also, if you didn't want to count bikes on the crosswalk, I'd prefer they didn't trigger the U-turn, because that's quite misleading. I mean, you've had the time and been able to look into it and figure it out and interpret it, but maybe that won't be quite so general. So yes, that's something that we can do today, actually. With maybe I should let Brent comment. He might be rolling his eyes at me, but that is.
Well, that's good to hear. I'll definitely follow up on that now that the Pandora's box has been open, and I do apologize in advance to Dana and Brent, who've been valuable in helping Coquitlam. We went from one system to 5, and I think we're installing our 22nd, and it's only the second year that we've been introduced to MileVision. We do believe in the product, but I think that we are definitely stretching the staff a little bit. So thanks for your time, guys.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're thankful for the partnership.
Yeah, for sure. That was a great discussion. A lot of great comments in there. Shannon, do we have any other quick ones in the list, or is that good for today? I don't know if we still have Shannon or not.
I'm still here, just trying to get out of off of mute. I think that's about it for today. So we thank everyone for their time.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much, Shannon, Mohan, and Bernard. Thanks. That was a great discussion at the end there. If you have more questions or you want to talk more, feel free to reach out to any of us. We would be happy to set up one-on-one sessions and go into it further. It sounds like a lot of great stuff. Stay tuned for our next session. We do have one coming up in, I guess, the first or second week of May. So we'll send out a follow-up email for there, and we'll get into traffic signal networks, managing the traffic signal network from TrafficLink. So another exciting session coming in about a month, and we'll unpack some more then. So yeah, feel free to send more questions or reach out to us directly. If otherwise, have a good rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining today. Thanks, everyone. We'll close this off now. Bye.